Howdy, everyone. Well, I've got the shop rearranged yet again. This is back to the way that it was prior to fitting the tail onto the fuselage. So I've got it back into my wing riveting configuration, if you will. But prior to doing that, I've got to install the roll servo. So the roll servo is in here. Here's the wiring harness for it. Here's a support bracket that needs to be bent into shape. Of course, I've got the wing in the wing cradle. Here are some miscellaneous pieces, parts that came with the install kit. You can see the bracket there and the push-pull tube, miscellaneous washers and nuts and things of that nature. Again, I wish I could have gotten some dimensions for something as simple as this. I would have made my own. Personally, I think this is a rip. You get a piece of aluminum tubing with a couple of rod ends, and like I said, some miscellaneous washers, nuts, bolts. This bracket and the other bracket that I just showed you that I said needs to be bent to shape. It's like $65 for a couple pieces of bent steel and some simple miscellaneous hardware. So I bought it just because I didn't want to screw around with trying to figure out how to make it myself, although now that I see it, it would be incredibly easy. Having said that, here's my bell crank. I've got to get in here and take this bracket out. The black bracket will replace that one, and then get the servo mounted and get the push-pull tube and everything put in here. So I'm just getting started. As you can see, I've got the hardware out. I'm going to start on the bracket. I'm going to take this out of here, and I'm just getting underway. So it's going to be a pretty straightforward, simple endeavor. I doubt that I'll record very much of the actual install, but let's see how it goes. Howdy, everyone. So here are a couple of changes I'm making right out of the gate on my roll servo installation. The wiring harness comes with a black ground already attached to the plug. This is the ground here in my hand. But it is only about 18, 20 inches in length, something like that, the ground cable. And if you bring up the wiring instructions on the GRT website, you go to the servo installation instructions and scroll through it. There's a note here on the wiring diagram for both the roll and the pitch servo. It says that the black 20 gauge wire is a max length of 2 feet. It can be extended to 20 feet with either 12 or 14 gauge, or you can ground it to the airframe near the servo. I am not going to do any local grounds. I'm running all my grounds back to a home run somewhere in the cockpit or in the engine compartment. So I have elected to extend this 20 gauge ground using 14 gauge wire. And that is the first thing that I have done. So here is my 14 gauge. And I've already, where'd you go? I've already made my solder joint here with the heat shrink. So now I've got plenty of ground to run all the way back to the cockpit. That's the first change. The second is this. Here's the servo. And it basically mounts this way in the wing. So your mounting bracket, your bell crank assembly will be over here, and then you got your push-pull tube that goes here, and these two bolts, these two screw holes get bolted to the black bracket that I'll show you later on. So that's how it installs. They give you this clamshell clamp dealio. It's plastic, and it's supposed to basically screw, you clamp it around the plug in this fashion here, if you can imagine this being inside here. It just acts as a strain relief for the wires, and it gives you something that you can pull this on and off with. However, with the servo installed, this basically won't plug in. The plug on the servo is right here in the back. There's not enough room for this to plug in and then have the wires come out. Even if you could wedge it in there, if you ever needed to unplug this for any reason, you would not be able to do that without taking the servo out. So I am planning on not using this. So first thing that I've noted, without this relatively thick plastic clamshell, when you have this plugged in here, these ears are very thin on this piece. These ears here are relatively thin. The various screws that come with this are too long to drive down into these mounts and tighten this in place. So all I did was I took two of the shortest screws that came in this kit and I cut them down. So now I can run these all the way into the mount. I can run these all the way into here and they will tighten this down nicely. So for strain relief, all I'm going to do is wrap this with some various layers of heat shrink tubing. And I'm going to basically gather these up with a few layers as a strain relief. And then with this plugged in the back, I can run my wires however I want to run them. The spar is like right here. So I should be able to run them however I want without too much strain on the wires themselves. Now that I think about it, if I wanted to remove this, I still can't remove it because you can't get back here with the screwdriver to take these screws out. So I suppose in theory you might be able to get away with using this, but I just don't think there's enough space back there. With this plugged in, where the wires come out here, it would have to be a pretty hard bend to get that to work, and I'm just not comfortable with that. So let me get some heat shrink on here and I'll get this fitted up and we'll move on.